So we should be recording to the computer at this point, and it should be good to go. So we're going to be reading Othello by William Shakespeare. We're going to be looking at some themes and symbolic images. Shakespeare tends to introduce all of his characters in the first act, but also introduce all of his themes and all of his symbolic images in the first act. And generally, one of the keys to understanding the themes is looking at the imagery that he chooses, because it's all connected. He has these particular symbols and they show up over and over and over again. And if you can identify them early, they help you understand the whole play. And so that's really what I want to go over today. So I'm just going to run down the list. I think I gave you an overview of the basic plot of the story, that Othello is a general from Morocco who is in love and marrying a girl named Desdemona, who is a senator's daughter from Venice. They're different in every way possible. He had the really difficult life involving, battles and bloodshed and loss and escaping from slavery and, all kinds of stuff. And she has had sort of a cushy socialite life in Venice. And she's 16 and he's like, not 16, she's maybe 18, I don't know, it doesn't ever tell us her age, just that she's young. She's around your age, and Othello is around my age. He's around 40, so there's a significant age difference as well. And then he's black and she's white, and so we've got all of these differences that Shakespeare is throwing at us and asking us sort of thematically about love. Can love conquer everything, or is love limited? Can two people so different have a meaningful and worthwhile relationship? And that's something we're going to look at over the course of the story. So I'm just going to tick down the themes relatively quickly here. The primary theme, the most obvious theme of Othello, is going to be jealousy. There are a number of characters who are jealous in various ways over the course of the story, and I've sort of listed them there for you. Our main character, Othello, does not start off jealous at all. Remember, he's a dynamic character. We want to track his changes, and his changes are going to have to do with this theme. The character Yago, who is the antagonist, is very jealous. I think I went over this. He's a middle-class guy who's worked with Othello for years and fought beside him, and he expected to be elevated to Othello's second in command when the position came open, and Othello did not elevate Yago to that second in command position. Instead, he put a guy named Cassio in charge of that. And Yago is very jealous that he didn't get the position that he thought he deserved. Bianca is Cassio's girlfriend slash strumpet. I don't know what word you want me to use here. We're going to use the old school language. She is a woman of ill repute who has fallen in love with Cassio. Cassio is the kind of guy who visits whorehouses and whatnot. And Emilia is Yago's wife. And she's very familiar with jealousy because she's married to her husband, but they don't have a particularly good relationship. And you definitely get the impression that Emilia wishes they did. And so there's some jealousy on her part for people who are in loving relationships and things like that. So a secondary theme is loss of innocence. We're going to be watching Othello change. I think I mentioned this last class, but in a large part, Othello is sort of an allegory for the Garden of Eden story in the Bible. So if you're familiar with your Bible and you know the Garden of Eden story with Adam and Eve and original sin and temptation, that shows up in this story in an allegorical way, with Othello playing the part of Adam and Yago playing the part of Satan, and Desdemona theoretically playing the part of I don't know if you want to call her Eve or an angel. She's sort of like the angelic figure in the story. But the whole story is about Othello sort of losing his kindness and innocence. It's a tragedy, and we'll see these things happen as they go through. And of course, all of these themes are tied together. Next, we have love and trust. Trust is an essential element of love. Can you have a loving relationship if you don't have trust? This is a central question of Othello. And so the way that Yago is going to undermine Othello and Desdemona's relationship is through jealousy and through trust. And this is a question that we want to ask too. Who do you trust in your relationship? Do you always trust your wife? Or do you trust a guy who's been on the battlefield with you and had your back? Is it bros before women of questionable morality? Or is it, your wife comes first? And this is a question that Othello is going to struggle with And this leads directly into our next theme, which is appearance versus reality. I think this is about as far as I got last time. What people appear like on the outside is not necessarily who they are on the inside. And this play is really structured around this idea that Yago, who is a terrible human being, has a good reputation, and he uses that to his advantage. People assume that he's honest. People assume that he's good and kind, and he is not. Similarly, Othello, who is really a wonderful person, people assume all kinds of negative things about him because of his race, because he's in a relationship with this girl who's significantly younger than he is. They have all these preconceived notions about him. And so he's got a negative appearance, but a good reality. And Yago has a good appearance, but a negative reality. And the whole plot is going to situate on the ability of Yago to make Desdemona have a negative appearance to Othello, even though she doesn't necessarily deserve it. And like I said, this whole play is based on dramatic irony. Yago is going to reveal his plot to us step by step throughout the play. So none of this is a surprise as we go through the play, but it's just something that you want to keep an eye on and watch how Yago changes the appearance. And when the appearance changes, people act on it, and it changes sort of their reality. It becomes sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. Racial discrimination is another one of our themes here. I mean, obviously, this is an old story, and we're coming at it from an American perspective. And, I want to say slavery by race is not something that was going on in Europe at the time. Not the way that it happened in America. Sure, there were Europeans who were selling slaves to Americans in sort of a racial way, but there was plenty of discrimination by race going on in Europe at the time, and that comes across in this play. People just assume that because Othello is Black, he has certain racial attributes, and they attribute those to him, even though he himself doesn't follow any of those. And so the question that we want to ask as we watch the play, we want to understand it in the context of its time. Shakespeare wasn't writing it for 2020 America. He wasn't writing it for us and our perspective of the world. He was writing it for his own audience and for his own reasons and doing it his own way. But at the end of the day, society has beliefs about Othello, and they put those beliefs on him all the time, and he struggles to be his own person and be free from those societal beliefs. And that struggle is a central theme of the story. So the question of how race is treated in Othello and what Shakespeare views about that is something that we want to pay attention to as we read the story and look at it. We've got to watch it though and not read it from like American cultural perspective. We've got to think about it as a piece of Renaissance literature work. So then we have gender roles and inequality as well. There's, what did I write there? There's a number of female figures in this story, and none of them have anything like equality with the male figures in the story. And they're all pigeonholed into very particular gender roles. Now, this is not surprising given it's a Renaissance work of literature, and women really have three possible roles in medieval and Renaissance works. And Shakespeare, I think, is very aware of this because he puts the women into those three roles. The three roles are virgin, wife, and whore. And that's pretty much where women get stuck in older works of literature. And to some extent, even in society today, we try and put women into one of those three categories. And this is a holdover that we still look at culturally and still stick with. So Emilia is the wife. She's married to Yago. They're in a monogamous relationship. And so she'd represent that. Desdemona, she is just getting married. She is a young girl at the beginning of the story. And so on some level, she represents sort of the virgin. She's pure and perfect and young and all those sorts of things. And then Bianca is a whore. That's her job. And so you look at these three characters and these three stereotypes, and you see what their role is in society, what they're allowed to do in the story, and how their, I don't know, their roles force them into certain actions. And I think Shakespeare's saying something here as well. Most playwrights of the time period did not develop female characters very much. Shakespeare's an exception. He realizes that the women in the world are human and have all the same emotions, and so he makes women strong characters. He makes them sympathetic characters, and all of these characters become sort of interesting and important characters over the course of the story, and chafe at the roles that they're put in to some degree or another. And we can learn something about gender roles in the Renaissance by analyzing them over the course of the story. So those are some themes. There's obviously more that I could throw on there, but those are 6 good ones that you could easily write your literary reaction papers about or anything like that. Any questions on themes? You guys good? Okay. All right, moving on. Next, we've got symbolic images, and a lot of these connect to the themes in various ways. Shakespeare's going to do a lot with darkness and light, and we're going to be looking at a couple of different levels of darkness and light in the story. First off, you have the literal level of light on the stage. Bad things in Othello tend to happen at night. There's dark scenes where people are betraying other people and doing negative things. And then there's light scenes where things are sort of all open and in the clear. So darkness masks the intentions. It connects to the appearance versus reality theme. People who are perceived as good are doing a lot of their evil deeds in the dark. And so you've got a literal darkness and light there. But you've also got the skin tone darkness and light that comes in, and this idea that society believes that dark is evil and light is good. That goes back to the Bible, by the way. Jesus and sort of like, I am the light, in me there is no darkness at all, and those sorts of lines that you can get biblically. They sort of substantiate this good versus evil, dark and light idea. But I think it's even more primal than that for us as human beings. Like we are not nocturnal, right? So darkness is scary. We don't see as well at night. We don't sense as well as night. Darkness has a certain amount of fear and danger associated with it. And I think Shakespeare understands that and plays on that. So we're going to see darkness and light as a theme, both in a moral way, darkness being evil and light being good, and in a racial way, and in a literal way in terms of the lighting level on the stage. And this is something that we can track as we go through the story. Sometimes it's characterized as black and white, white being, the color that's symbolic of purity in Western literature. It's why women get married in white wedding dresses, because it symbolizes their purity. Or why the perfectly white sheep is the one that's sacrificed, as a sacrificial lamb for the sins of other people. And culturally, that's been the way it has been forever. Another symbol that we get in here is blood. Blood in Shakespeare often represents rage or anger or guilt. And we'll see that in Othello when blood is spilled. When Othello, the character, talks about blood, whether it's other people's blood or his own blood, you can sort of see him starting to change as a character, and his rage and his anger starting to escalate. And then, of course, once you commit a murder or a crime, there's a lot of blood that's shed, and that immediately starts to flip towards guilt and stuff like that. Animals. There are a ton of animal images in Othello. The person who uses animal images the most is Yago. He is the antagonist, and he does it in a couple of different ways. First off, he likes to compare other characters to animals. And when you actually look at the animals that he chooses to compare other characters to, it actually is pretty revealing about that character's personality. You can learn a lot about a character and their personality from the animals that Yago is using to compare them to. But he also uses animals to talk about things that you couldn't talk about on stage involving people. So he's constantly using animals for sexual innuendo. Shakespeare can't talk about sex on stage in a meaningful way in a Renaissance play, but Yago can talk about animals having sex, and that's not rude in the same way. And so he does that. He uses animals doing things that are, sexual in nature, and that allows him to talk about sex without talking about sex. So it's sort of a euphemism throughout, and you can see that as well. Angels and devils, like I said, this whole thing is an allegory on some level for the Garden of Eden scene, and Yago is sort of a devil figure, and Desdemona is sort of an angel figure. And so you end up with this opposition of the two characters, but their language is constantly referencing angels and devils too. So through his language, Yago makes himself satanic, and through her language, Desdemona makes herself angelic. And you just, whenever you see them show up in the story, you can stop and say, hey, what's going on here? And there's some symbolic significance to the angels and devils and the way that they use their language. Pay attention, the single most important symbol in the entire story, I'll bold it for you. Well, it's already bolded. I'll italicize it for you, is a handkerchief. And we'll get into this, but Othello gifted Desdemona a handkerchief as his first gift to her. And it was a gift to him from his mother. And the handkerchief apparently is an heirloom of his family, and it's got some magic in it. We'll talk about that later. But it comes to sort of symbolize Desdemona's purity and her virginity and the love that Desdemona and Othello share with each other. And of course, if you were to say to lose a handkerchief and somebody else is to pick it up, or if it is lost entirely, it could symbolize, to Othello, say, her losing her virginity or their love being lost or something like that. And that's sort of how Shakespeare uses it. So keep your eyes open for the handkerchief when it shows up. It's an important symbol. There's a lot of music imagery throughout, in particularly the idea of harmony and discord. Shakespeare uses it to connect to the relationship of Desdemona and Othello. Their relationship is categorized at the beginning as sort of in harmony, this perfect symphony of instruments working together. And Yago sets about trying to ruin that harmony, try to make the two instruments play out of tune. And so he uses a fair amount of music imagery. What's interesting about this, connecting to some of the other themes, is that Satan, Lucifer, when he was an angel of music. That was sort of his area of expertise, which connects to the whole like rock and roll is the devil's music and like all of those sorts of things that have been said over the ages. But him being very interested in the harmony and discord of the main characters and being a Satan figure, I think is kind of interesting. Finally, we have this weird pregnancy and birth imagery that shows up off and on. One of the interesting things about our antagonist, Yago, and his wife, Amelia, is they have no kids. They've been married for a while, and no kids have come out of this relationship. It's generally believed that, for whatever reason, Yago can't have kids. And there's a fair number of hints in the story that maybe he's impotent, like maybe he's not capable of, and that being the case, the closest thing that he can have to a child is sort of his evil plan to ruin Othello's life. And so a lot of times he characterizes his plan as a pregnancy that is going to give birth to some sort of a monstrous, event at the end of the story. So like the whole story is almost like a pregnancy destined for the birth of the evil plan, the hatching of the plan, if you will, at the end. And so there's these weird pregnancy images throughout the whole thing that you can track and look at as well. So those are all things that get introduced in the first act, and you'll see them, I think, relatively clearly, and we'll stop and analyze them. Anybody have any questions about those? Yeah, following loud and clear on Zoom here and in the classroom. All right. So let's jump over here. We're going to assign parts if I can. I've already assigned myself to the character with the most lines, Yago. Also, he's horrible. He's sexist and racist and evil, and I don't want to put that on anybody to have to read that part, so I will volunteer to do it myself. I'll also play all the weird randos that show up. That way we don't have to keep track of all of that. But I want to give you an overview of each of the characters so you know who you're signing up for if you decide to sign up, and then I'll put you in here, and I'll share this in the feed here in the chat, and you can make a copy of it and keep it. So our title character, sometimes that's called the titular character, the character of the title. He's also our tragic hero is Othello. Like I said, he's a descendant of Moroccan princes from Morocco and North Africa. He's Black. His family was probably Muslim, but he's converted to Christianity. He's 40 years old. He's fought in battles all over the Mediterranean. He now controls an entire mercenary army that he is the general of. He is a very important man who's had a very interesting life experience, and he's the focus of the story. Yago, who has the most lines in the play, even though the play is called Othello, is the antagonist of the story. He wanted to be Othello's second in command, but was passed over for the job when it was given to Cassio. And Yago comes from a middle-class background. He's married to Emilia, and he's an ambitious guy who has wanted to achieve a lot in his life and feels like he has been limited by Othello and is very jealous and angry about it. He's also racist. He doesn't like Othello because Othello is Black. He's also sexist. He doesn't much care for women, and you can see that in his dialogue. So Shakespeare does a good job of making him evil in just about every way that a person can be evil. And we'll see he's a Satan figure as well. We'll see his plan go off. Cassio is the guy Othello hired to be his second in command. Cassio's straight out of college. He's a ladies' man, very, very attractive, very polite. He thinks of himself as a knight, and so he follows sort of the code of chivalry that you would expect to see in Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. The only real difference is that Cassio has some vices. He likes, like I said, the ladies. He visits Bianca, who is a whore, and he, at the beginning of the story, you find out that he was almost forced into a marriage with a girl he got pregnant. And that he is, escaped from that and is now Othello's second in command. He got hired because Othello knew him apparently in his youth, but also Othello feels insecure. He's living in Venice, and he is not up on all of the European culture and all of the politeness and all the niceties, and he needs somebody to sort of help him and train him and get him to understand how to exist in Venetian society successfully. And so he has hired Cassio to be his second in command. Cassio did go to military school, but he's never fought in a battle. And so he's sort of, that's why Iago's pissed, because Iago's fought in a bunch of battles. And Othello knows that Iago knows how to fight and can hold his own, and he feels like he's got the experience, but not the education. It's almost like Iago's somebody who went, instead of going to college, he went off into the workforce, and he's got like 13 years of hard work on his resume, and this guy Cassio went to college for 4 years and got out and has like nothing on his resume, and he gets hired for the high-paying job and in a position of authority over Yago, even though he's never done anything in his life. So you can sort of feel for Yago, I think, on some level and understand. Oh, also, I think this is funny. Cassio apparently is really good at math. And I don't know if that's where the brand Cassio calculator got its name or not, but it's just kind of fun. Oh, I keep saying other things. Cassio is also one of the characters in the story who gets a first name. We don't know if Othello is his last name or his first name, or if Yago is his first name or his last name. We don't know. But Cassio's full name is Michael Cassio. And what's interesting about that is if the whole thing's an allegory, right, and Yago's a Satan figure, well, who is Satan's biggest enemy biblically? It's the Archangel Michael. And so these two are sort of opposed to each other, and who wanted to be essentially God, and who was the second in command. Like, Shakespeare knows what he's doing, and he likes to play with names and things like that. Like, for example, if you look at the name Othello, it's got the word hell in it, which is interesting. And if you look at his love interest, Desdemona, it's got the word demon in it. Like, he's doing some interesting things, and we can look and try and see and understand them. So Desdemona is the female lead. She is, like I said, the socialite daughter of a senator of Venice. She comes from a high rank. She's lived sort of a cushy lifestyle to this point. She's also been sought after by a lot of young Venetian men who want to make an advantageous marriage. One of them is this guy, Rodrigo. They're all, I don't know, Prince Charming sort of figures with their carefully combed hair and their beautiful outfits, and they're all her age. And she has rejected them all. At the beginning of the story, she is running off and getting married to Othello, who she has fallen in love with. So she is pure and perfect and sort of represents the figure of the Virgin throughout. She's also sort of an angel figure and on some level, maybe a Jesus figure, as we'll see as we read the story. So that's her. Emilia is married to Yago. She is sort of a middle-class woman. She's actually going to be made the a lady in waiting or maid of Desdemona once the story sort of kicks off. She is sort of bitter because she's married to Yago, who wouldn't be. They don't have any kids, and it's implied that Yago may be impotent. But more than that, Yago just treats her really badly and is jealous of her all the time, as you imagine an impotent guy might be. Yeah, that's Emilia. Then we get down to some of the less. In fact, starting with Emilia, these characters don't have as many lines. These are the big four, and then you got the fewer lines down here. Rodrigo. Rodrigo is a young Venetian man who is desperately in love with Desdemona. He has essentially been stalking her and writing her sonnets and doing the kinds of things that you might imagine a sonnet writer would do after reading all those sonnets that we read in class. He is also relatively dumb. And so actually, he's one of the guys who shows up in the very first act of the play. It turns out that he has been paying Yago to help keep tabs on Desdemona and Othello. And when he finds out that Othello and Desdemona are eloping and getting married, he's kind of pissed because he wants to be with Desdemona. And so he's going to sort of creep on her throughout the entire story. And he's part of the comic relief on some level because he's so dumb and he's so, I don't know what word I want. He's so incredibly devoted to Desdemona. He thinks somehow he still has a chance with her even after she gets married. I mean, whatever. Brabanchio is Desdemona's father. He's a senator of Venice. He's an old man. He only shows up in the first act. So if you want to be a character that comes and goes relatively quickly, Brabanchio is your man. He is also racist, though, so just an FYI. As soon as he finds out that his daughter is marrying a 40-year-old black guy, he loses his mind a little bit. To be fair, though, that age difference would piss me off if I had a daughter too, and she's suddenly like, I'm marrying a 40-year-old dude. I'd be like, wait, what? So I don't know how I'd handle that in his place. Bianca is the love interest of Cassio. Well, no, Cassio doesn't think she's his love interest. She thinks that he's her love interest. She, like I said, is a whore. She lives in an island called Cyprus. And she's 100% devoted to Cassio and wants to, be with him. And he just thinks of her as, a whore. And so you have this weird relationship between the two of them. She's the one who's jealous. Cassio is like, what? I'm your customer. Like, what? And he doesn't see it that way at all. Montano, he's a friend of Othello's and the governor of the island of Cyprus. He's got some lines, but nothing too big. The Duke, he shows up in Act 1, and that's it, and he's out as well. He is the ruler of Venice. He's got some nice rhyming lines and has a couple of monologues, but nothing too big. Like I said, we're getting down to the characters with fewer lines. I tried to put them in order of the more to less lines that they have. Rodrigo and Graziano, they're two Venetians who show up in Act 4, I think. They do not have very many lines. I just like to think of them as like Mario and Luigi. They come in and they're Italian. I guess Lodovico is a very attractive man, so he's probably Mario. And Graziano is a cousin of Desdemona who is less attractive. Then we have this character who's called Clown, who's an overly intelligent servant that makes fun of Othello and at some point Desdemona and Emilia as well. He likes to make puns and make jokes and things like that. So those are all of your characters. Let me stop the recording so when people watch it, they don't have to watch us select characters, but I'm going to try and